Hello, classmates. Today we begin to study the political economy of trade policy. It includes three issues: the case for free trade, national welfare arguments against free trade, income distribution, and trade policy. In this lecture, we will study the case for free trade. On November 8, 2005, the US government and the government of China signed a memorandum of understanding which China agreed to establish quotas on its exports of various types of clothes and textiles to the United States. For example, China agreed that in 2006, it would not ship more than 772.8 million pairs of stocks to America. This agreement significantly raised the price of stocks and other goods to American consumers. While China was willing to accommodate the US on this point, however, it balked at US demands that it reduces its own tariffs on manufactured and agricultural goods. Both the Chinese and the US governments then were determined to pursue policies that produced more cost than benefits. According to the cost-benefit analysis we have learned, clearly, government policies reflect objectives that go beyond simple measures of cost and benefit. It is necessary for us to examine some of the reasons governments don't base their trade policy on economists' cost-benefit calculations, which is political economy of trade policy. But the first step toward understanding actual trade policies is to ask what reasons there are for governments not to interfere with trade. That is, what is the case for free trade? Few countries have anything approaching completely free trade. The city of Hong Kong, which is legally part of China, but maintains a separate economic policy, may be the only modern economy with no tariffs or import quotas. Nonetheless, since the time of Adam Smith, economists have advocated free trade as an ideal toward which trade policy should strive. The reasons for this advocacy are not quite as simple as the idea itself. Theoretical models suggest that free trade will avoid the efficiency losses associated with protection. Many economists believe that free trade produces additional gains beyond the elimination of production and consumption distortions. Finally, even among economists who believe free trade is a less than perfect policy, many believe free trade is usually better than any other policy a government is likely to follow. We will discuss it from four aspects. First, we will examine the relationship between free trade and efficiency. The efficiency case of free trade is simply the reverse of the cost-benefit analysis of a tariff. Figure 1 shows the basic point once again. For the case of a small country that cannot influence foreign export prices, a tariff causes a net loss to the economy measured by the area of the two triangles. It does so by distorting the economic incentives of both producers and consumers. Conversely, a move to free trade eliminates this distortion and increases national welfare. In the modern world, for reasons, tariff rates are generally low and import quota relatively rare as a result. Estimates of the total cost of distortions due to tariffs and import quotas tend to be modest in size. Table 1 shows one fairly recent estimate of the gains from a move to worldwide free trade, measured as a percentage of GDP. For the world as a whole, according to these estimates, protection costs less than 1% of GDP. The gains from free trade are somewhat smaller for advanced economies such as the United States and Europe, and somewhat larger for the poorer developing countries. Second, let's look at the additional gains or dynamic gains from free trade. Many economists argue that there are important gains from free trade not accounted for in conventional cost-benefit analysis, especially in the case of small countries and the developing countries. One kind of dynamic gains involves economy of scale. Protected market limited gains from external economies of scale by inhibiting the concentration of industries. When the economies of scale are internal, they not only fragment production internationally, but by reducing competition and raising profits, they also need to many firms to enter the protected industry. With the proliferation of firms in a rural domestic market, the scale of production of each firm becomes inefficient. A good example of how protection leads to inefficient scale is the case of the Argentina automobile industry, which emerged because of import restrictions. An efficient scale assembly plant should make from 18,000 to 200,000 automobiles per year. Yet, in 1964, the Argentina industry, which produced only 160,000 cars, had no fewer than 13 firms. Some economists argue that the need to deter excessive entry and the resulting inefficient scale of production is a reason for free trade that goes beyond the standard cost-benefit calculations. Another argument for free trade is that by providing entrepreneurs with incentive to seeking new ways to export or compete with imports, free trade offers more opportunities for learning and innovation than are provided by system-managed trade, where the government largely dictated the pattern of imports and exports. Related form of gains from free trade involves the tendency for more productive firms to engage in exports. While less productive stay with the domestic market. This suggests that a move to free trade makes the economy as a whole more efficient by shifting the industrial mix toward a firm with higher productivity. These dynamic arguments for free trade are difficult to quantify in general. Models that try to take an economy of scale and imperfect competition into account, yield bigger numbers than those reported in Table 1. However, there is no consensus about just how much bigger the gains from free trade really are. If the additional gains from free trade are as large as some economists believe, the cost of distorting trade with tariffs, quotas, export subsidies, and so on are correspondingly larger than the conventional cost-benefit analysis measures. Third, some trade restrictions may result in rent-seeking. When imports are restricted with a quota rather than a tariff, the cost is sometimes magnified by a process known as rent-seeking. To enforce an import quota, a government has to issue import license, and that economic rents accrue to whoever receives this license. In some cases, individuals and companies incur substantial costs, wasting some of the economy's productive resources in an effort to get an import license. A famous example involved India in the 1950s and the 1960s. At that time, Indian companies were allocated the right to buy imported inputs in proportion to the installed capacity. This created an incentive to overinvest. For instance, the steel company might build more blast furnaces than it expected to need, simply because this would give it a large number of import licenses. The resources used to build this idle capacity represented a cost of protection over and above the costs shown in Figure 1. Last, there exist political arguments for free trade. A political argument for free trade reflects the fact that a political commitment to free trade may be a good idea in practice, even though they may be better policy in principle. Economists often argue that trade policy in practice are dominated by special interest politics rather than by consideration of national costs and benefits. Economists can sometimes show that in theory, a selective set of tariffs and export subsidies could increase national welfare, but that in reality, many government agencies attempting to pursue a sophisticated program of intervention in trade would probably be captured by interest groups and converted into a device for redistributing income to politically influential sectors. If this argument is correct, it may be better to advocate free trade without exceptions, even though on purely economic grounds, free trade may not always be best conceivable policy. The arguments outlined in the previous section probably represented the standard view of most international economists, at least those in the United States. One, the conventionally measured costs of deviating from free trade are large. Two, there are other benefits from free trade that add to the cost of protectionist policies. Three, any attempt to pursue sophisticated deviation from free trade will be subverted by the political process. Nonetheless, there are intellectually respectable arguments for deviating from free trade, and these arguments deserve a fair hearing. Next lecture, we will discuss the case against free trade. That's all for this lecture. Thanks for your joining. See you next time.